I think is lost in the whole political and social media discussion about the greater threat of terrorism is specific instances in which they happen. Like with the Brussels attack yesterday, the government and the police in Brussels have really shit the bed, and on a global scale now, because you see, I mean, Belgium for years now has had more fighters leave to Syria to join ISIS than any European country per capita. It's shocking numbers, and the government seemingly has done very little in response. One of the brothers in the suicide attack yesterday was actually captured and then released just months ago because Belgium couldn't connect them to any kind of terror links. We saw just last week when they arrested the remaining Paris attacker. It took them over 4 months to find him, even though he was in the same neighborhood where he lived, where all these guys lived, in Molenbeek. And, yeah, he was right there. We fear terrorism, but, Peter, isn't the real problem, and the reason these attacks are happening in this part of Europe in particular, is the threat of government and police incompetence when we're dealing with these situations?
Well, you know, if you take the word terrorism off the table and just talk about the acts as acts of violence, let's just use that. That's a neutral enough word. You know, the Newtown Sandy Hook shootings a couple of years ago in the United States took about as many lives as were lost in Belgium yesterday. And the lives were children, and they were all Americans. You really have to find, I'm sure if you went out on the street and asked Americans today whether more people died at Sandy Hook or in Belgium, they'd all say Belgium. These are acts of violence. They occur on a rational scale very infrequently. You know, you're talking about a couple of attacks, two attacks in Paris in a year, one in Belgium in a year. Here in the United States, we've had in 220 years basically one catastrophic, horrific day. And since then, not a lot. We've all seen the statistics. Your chances of getting hit by lightning are greater than being a victim of terrorism inside the United States. So I think perspective is very, very important on this. It takes the cops a long time sometimes to track down a bad guy. They still haven't found who killed Jimmy Hoffa or who shot JFK. Not to make light of it, but the idea is that solving a crime, tracking down one individual inside of a big city, particularly one who has a ethnic or kin group around him who's actively trying to protect him, takes some time. And the Belgian police did their work, and they tracked down the parachuter, and they'll track down, I'm sure, the people who did this thing yesterday. It's certainly not a matter of condoning terrorism in any way whatsoever. It's a matter of keeping a perspective on it and trying to avoid assisting the terrorists by triggering panic in our own society and triggering the crazy stuff that Republican candidates have been kicking out as possible solutions. If we think of it as a crime, we think of it as violence, I think there's perspective that is oftentimes otherwise very difficult to get a hold of.
Well, you know, we talked about this last time. One second. We talked about this after the San Bernardino attacks. You said that we should police terrorism the way that we should police every other crime. But, you know, in this instance, you have brothers who grew up together. In Paris, you had brothers and close friends who grew up together in this one neighborhood. And, you know, they're not communicating out in the open. It's very difficult to infiltrate this. It's very difficult to, you know, get a good grasp on what's happening when they're communicating the way they are. How do you police that?
Well, you police it the way that you can. We can point to, Igor, you and I live in New York City. There are people murdered here all the time. And any other big city. Sorry, it's called Latest. You know, we're trying to keep up with the breaking. But I mean, there's people murdered all the time. There are bank robberies. There are drug deals. There are, you know, crimes committed all the time. And it is, unfortunately, a part of modern life that crime goes on like this in some other big cities around the world. So, sure, we can't infiltrate every neighborhood. And, in fact, arguably, these things cause more trouble, more harm than they're worth. You know, you've got to back up a few steps on all this and say, well, what causes people to become terrorists? What are the roots of these things? Why are these terror events, even though they're still kind of far apart? Why are they more common now than they were at times in the past? If you can start to answer those questions, particularly focusing on the last 15 years since 9/11, you're starting then to talk about a more comprehensive solution that will work alongside of policing rather than simply playing whack-a-mole, which is basically the way we could sum up our anti-terrorism strategy to date.
Josh, did you want to jump in?
Well, yeah, and it's I'm glad you guys went ahead, because this is what I was going to bring up. I mean, if you look back to say, starting with the first World Trade Center bombing in 1993, and then the terrorism task force of the FBI that was based in New York after that, headed by an agent by the name of John O'Neill, who tragically left the FBI in 2001 because they just weren't interested in prosecuting terror to the extent that he thought they should be. And so he decided to go into the private sector as head of security for the World Trade Center. And he died in 9/11. But, before that, his whole career was about tracking, from the 1993 bombing, who was involved, where the materials came from, tracking the money, the USS Cole bombing and the embassy bombings, and what's impressive is how much work they were able to get done with no support of the top brass, which was there were political things going on there, people vying for director and whatnot, and the fact that it wasn't seen as that grave of a concern. I mean, you have to remember that before 9/11, terrorism was a thing that happened over there. It didn't really happen here, and when it does, we get our man and get them locked up, and it was in losing that strategy and after 9/11 becoming, making them part of this axis of evil and giving it this kind of supernatural power instead of it just being, thugs with guns and bombs who are decent at sneaking into places. I mean, they don't have special powers. They don't have, it's not some sort of magical, totally foreign ideology as it's Islam compared to, say, other religions. It's just that because of the circumstances in which these people live, desperate people turn to religion for hope. And the people in charge of these terror organizations and these terror cells are experts at taking that desperation and twisting it to murder and mayhem and crime and violence, and until we can recognize officially that sort of process happening, we're always going to be talking about fucking or whatever shit sounds. What do you think about this latest attack? The problem is that we're not talking seriously about it. The Republicans are thumping their chests, and Obama, he's been running near constant airstrikes, and he doesn't talk about it. So you have two sides of the coin there. One playing up the threat, and one perhaps arguably underselling the threat. And they need to start talking to the American people like they can handle it.
Well, just in terms of what you were talking about, us seeing it as happening over there, we still don't give a shit when similar attacks happen over there. I mean, just on Sunday, there was an attack in Ankara. It was a car bomb, killed over 30 people, injured over 100 people, got zero coverage compared to the wall-to-wall 2 days of Belgium coverage that we have right now.